at the time I was diagnosed, I was sick about 4 days out of every week. I could barely function. And I'm one of the ones that I've tried every diet, every food. I mean, you name it, I have done it. It's about a little bit of control. So a lot of us feel like we can't control any of the things with the chronic illness. And I've been able to figure out some really important things for myself. And that gave me a little bit of the control back. A lot of times I would hear stories like, I tried one medicine or I cut one thing out of my diet and I'm healed and I'm living my best life ever. And I couldn't figure out why that wasn't me.
Welcome to the Sick is Cool podcast, the show that's here to empower you, inspire you, and remind you that even in the face of chronic illness, you can lead an extraordinary life. I'm your host, Aimee Esther, and I'm thrilled to have you join our community. I understand the daily struggles, the physical and emotional roller coasters, and the relentless search for purpose and joy amidst it all. Although none of us chose to be a part of the Sick Club, here we are, warriors navigating a world that often doesn't understand us. Together, we are going to build a vibrant and supportive community that celebrates resilience and courage of the chronically ill. Now let's dive into today's episode and start reshaping our perspective on chronic illness. All right, welcome to the podcast. Will you start by telling us a little about yourself, your personal health journey, as well as just any other things about you?
Yeah. So I'm a mom of two boys. They are older now, but still a lot to deal with. I have a husband. I run a marketing agency. And then on top of all of that, I have multiple health conditions that kind of change everything from day to day. So I think in my early 20s, I was diagnosed with hypothyroidism, and it later found out it was Hashimoto's, dealt with that, ups and downs, had other illnesses and things coming up, but more recently, about 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. So I've kind of felt sick my entire life. For my early teenage years, I've been sick or dealing with something the entire time. And it's just after years and years and years, then you finally get some type of a diagnosis.
Yeah, that's a long journey. and it's so frustrating. I think a lot of people like who are watching this and following my channel and my podcast have dealt with that stress of trying to find solutions. It's so exhausting. So what advice do you have for someone who is searching and maybe having a hard time, or they've tried a lot of things and they want to give up? Or what's your advice for someone who's searching?
Yeah, so I'm one of the people that nothing works on. So any type of medications or any doctor's advice has never worked for me. And at first I felt really hopeless when you get really excited to try a medication and then you realize the side effects are too much for you, or it didn't change my life at all, or it didn't help me do anything. In the beginning, I felt really hopeless, but then I started to realize there's a lot more than just Western medicine. There are other options for us. And when you start to kind of open the door to other types of healing, there's other things out there. So for me, I embraced supplements. I embraced, seeing different types of doctors or seeing different doctors. And so for me to keep the hope was just that because one route didn't work or isn't working, there are other routes for us to try.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think it's hard not to get in your head of like, well, I've tried all these diets, or I've tried all these medications or all these supplements before, and they didn't work. And I get into that mindset too. Like, I've tried everything. It doesn't work. And there's always more out there. So how do you avoid like the treatment burnout? Like for me, sometimes I get so overwhelmed and stressed with trying so many things that don't work that I feel burnt out. And then I'm like, okay, nothing works. I'm not trying anything. This is just life. How do you stop that?
I give myself breaks. So when I start to feel burned out or like nothing's working, I'll say, you know what? We're going to take a few weeks off. We're not going to think about it. We're not going to think about diets. We're not going to think about supplements. I'm not going to think about those things. And I give myself like 2 weeks to cry or do whatever I need to do, feel frustrated. And then after that, I pick myself back up and say, okay, what is out there that I haven't tried? Because 100 things have already failed. And I'm one of the ones that I've tried every diet, every food. I mean, you name it, I have done it at this point. And so for me, it's like, okay, there's still something out there for me, but let's take a break in between. I don't have to do it 24/7. And I allow myself to feel frustrated and upset and all of those things, but I'll give myself, okay, for 2 weeks, we're not going to think about it. We're just going to live life. And after those 2 weeks, I feel more rejuvenated. I have more energy to say, okay, what area do I want to look at right now? Or what type of doctor do I need to find? Or, because there's always something going on for us. There's always a new doctor that I need to locate or a new supplement or whatever it is. But I just give myself breaks in between and tell myself that it's okay to take a break.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think there's seasons of life too, where like I had a newborn for a while and it's like, I just can't. Like, it might not be to me. It might be 2 months. It might be 4 months that I can't right now.
Just out.
Yeah. And then there might be times, like right now I'm kind of in a phase where there's some things I can try, but some things are a little much. Like maybe changing my diet is like a little much right now, but I can try little things here and there that little things I've been wanting to try. And I think when we're not in a hurry to like, we have to find out today, then we can allow our bodies time to like let these new treatments work, because sometimes it takes a while, right? Sometimes you cut out something from your diet and it takes weeks or months for it to have its effect on you. And other times it's like you need a little bit more time, right?
Yeah.
So I want to add another question in here that I just thought of. So if you're okay with that, when you are looking for treatments, how do you know what to try? Like, how do you know if you should try another supplement, even though the last 10 you tried didn't work? Or, where do you look and how do you find what to do?
Yeah. So for me, I, for some reason, enjoy reading studies. So I enjoy reading the studies that are happening for, lupus in particular or rheumatoid arthritis. And if something captures my attention in the study, then I just become a little more passionate about it. Or I pick out things out of different studies that maybe others didn't think of. And I'm like, wait a minute, that might benefit me or it might not, but I'm excited to try. So for me, it's all in studies or reading about other people's experiences and what worked for them. And I had to realize a long time ago that all of us, we all might have lupus or we might have arthritis, but the root of what's causing it is all different for everybody. So what works for you may never work for me. And I had to become okay with that. So when I'm reading studies, it might be a study about something I don't even have. But when I realize like the mechanism at the baseline of it, I'm like, okay, well, that's something I'm interested in or something that's malfunctioning in my body. And so for me, it's in the studies. I like reading the studies, learning about them, and then trying to figure out, is it something I can even incorporate? Because sometimes it's too crazy and I'm like, no, I can't do it. Mm-hmm. Or maybe at the time I can't think about it. And then other times I'm like, that's a really simple thing I could just throw in there and then just go for it and see what happens. So I like reading a lot of the medical studies and what people are trying. For me, that's where the inspiration comes from.
That's so good, because I think sometimes we just trust someone who knows more than us, right? And I think there's sometimes stages for that. Maybe when you first get diagnosed, you just have to trust what your doctor says or what that professional that you choose says. But then I think it's so empowering to take charge. It's for so long for me, I was just like, okay, if somebody says this works, I'm going to trust them because they know more than me. But really, you know your body best, especially if you've lived with it for a long time. And I think that's so empowering to learn about, like, why is this working for people? This certain supplement or this diet or this medication or whatever, or why do some people have side effects to this thing? Learning like why it works, and your body and how it does on certain things. And like you said, we all have our own unique things about our illnesses. So that is so good and so helpful, because I think I get overwhelmed too of like there's too many things, and especially because I put my life online, I'm always getting advice. And so sometimes I'll just keep a list too. Like, these are things I'd like to try, and then there's certain times where I'm more open to things. And sometimes something I heard about 5 years ago works today, and that's okay. It's okay if it takes me a while to like try something new, whether it's financially or mentally I can't handle it at that time. I think we just need to take it one step at a time.
Yeah. And for me, I think something you said too rings true. It's about a little bit of control. So a lot of us feel like we can't control any of the things with the chronic illness, but I can control, what I'm trying or wanting to do. And I've been able to figure out some really important things for myself. And that gave me a little bit of the control back. And that's why I like reading the studies and trying to figure things out. To me, it just gives me a little piece back.
Yeah, that's so good. So where do you find these studies? Like, say somebody is struggling with POTS or lupus or something, and they want to find some studies, different supplements or whatever they need to try.
So I like to go to PubMD. It's just a website online, and you can type in supplement names or what you're diagnosed with, and then you'll pull up studies with those keywords in it. So sometimes I'll just go on there and type in lupus, and what are they trying? What are they looking at? Or I'll type in a certain supplement name that I'm interested at the time to see what were they studying about it, or what type of mechanism was it helping with? And then I just kind of go from there. It's just in my nature to read it. I think it gives me something to do. And sometimes it's really interesting. Sometimes I'll read studies and I'm like, there's nothing there for me, or I just don't get it at the time, but then maybe come back to it later. So PubMD is where I like to go. I spend a little bit of time researching there just to see what's going on, or what types of studies are they having. And if there's anything that could possibly benefit me, then I like to read about it.
That's so good. That's so good and so helpful. I've never heard of that, so I'm definitely going to look that up. Like, my wheels are turning like, oh, I need to look up these things, because there's a lot of things on my list that, like, I don't know, is it worth the money or the energy to try it? So that's super helpful. Okay, I want to switch topics a little bit. So I want to talk about boundaries, because this is a question that comes up a lot. I think it's very difficult. So first of all, what are boundaries, and why are they an important step for a health journey?
So I got lucky, and when I was first diagnosed with lupus, the specialist sat me down and he said, if you keep doing everything that you're doing in your life right now, you'll be in a wheelchair. You won't be able to walk. You're going to lose most of what you already have. And that sunk in really, really deep with me. And then he said something else that really hit home. Was he told me that over 50% of his patients were divorced, and they were divorced about a year after their diagnosis. So he looked at me and said, you have to go home. You have to get your family on board. They have to know what's going on, and you guys together have to create boundaries so that you stay as healthy as you can. And that hit really, really hard for me. So I came home right away. I talked to my husband. I'm like, if I keep living the way that I'm living, and I wasn't living crazy or doing anything crazy, I was just living a typical mom's life. I was cooking, cleaning, doing all the typical things, and it was just too much for my body. And so we had to come to an agreement together, which was, what boundaries can we set as a family to protect my health, and then what do I need to protect personally so that I'm not sick all the time. So at the time I was diagnosed, I was sick about 4 days out of every week. I could barely function 4 days out of every week. I was sick. And it was coming to the point that I was in bed most of the time, or I was struggling to walk. So at that time, I wasn't leaving the home. I couldn't walk through stores. I couldn't, I was just staying at home doing typical tasks and then getting sick by the end of the day because I didn't have enough energy to even do just the common typical things that I was doing inside the home. So the boundaries I realized was just to protect my health. And it was foreign concept at the time. I think as women, we have problems with saying, I'm sick and can't do that right now because we feel like we have to do so many things, like cooking dinner. So we came to an agreement, stuff like if I'm too sick to cook, I can call my husband and say, I'm having, a day with lupus or whatever it is. You have to bring something home for us to eat. And so we made little boundaries like that, just little things. If I do the grocery shopping, then I don't I don't take the groceries out of the car. Or, and then even emotionally, if, you know how normal, I always say regular, well, people can get into arguments about, if the sugar runs out, or just little everyday normal arguments. And I realized that I couldn't have those anymore. I had to create boundaries. So I started to ask myself questions like, whatever I'm about to get upset about, or whatever conversation that would be emotionally charged, is it more important than my health? And I would have to consciously make that decision before I went down that path, which sounds crazy maybe to some people, or like a bit much, but it was how I was protecting myself to not be sick 4 days out of every week. And I still ask myself when I want to get mad at somebody or upset about just the frivolous things, is that really more important than my health? And most of the time I'm like, no, it's really not important at all. It's not important at all. So I'm able to just kind of let it go.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think like you're adding in like the emotional, mental aspect too, because sometimes that is too much as well. It's like, for me, like one of the things, like sometimes I just need to talk about it. Now I have my YouTube channel and the podcast, so like now I could just sit and talk. That was something that helped me so that I wasn't putting quite as much on my husband. And so we can find other ways. And I also think, as you were talking, I was thinking about like spouses or parents, if it's a younger person with chronic illness, or someone they live with, roommates or whatever, is that they need their own boundaries as well. Because I think my husband, it's like too much for him sometimes, because it is a lot when, you have kids and you have all these extra things and there's dinner, and he's like, oh, well, I was at work all day and then I have to come home and make dinner because you're feeling sick. And so I think setting boundaries for them too, and just having those conversations is really important. So both sides can say like, here's what I need, and here's what I can provide, because sometimes we can give a little more and in some areas because it doesn't affect our health as much. In others, it's like this, carrying the groceries in, for example, like might seem like a small thing, but when it affects you so big, like that's something you need a boundary on. And then you can give and take with spouses and those around you as well. It's so good. So how do you set up boundaries? Like, how do you know what those boundaries are? Is it just guess and check? And then how do you figure that out?
So for me, I centered my boundaries around triggers of what made me sick. So I spent a good year figuring out what triggered me to become so sick. So it took me about 2 days to realize anything emotional within 5 minutes, I'm out for the count. I will be sick for a week. 2 weeks. And I realized that emotionally, I cannot have any type of emotional stress. Now, it becomes hard because sometimes in life there's emotional stress I cannot get out of. There's issues in the family, or, death of loved ones, and you have to deal with it. But I'm able to put boundaries around it. So I'm not trying to deal with it like I'm a well person. I know my limitations. So all of my boundaries revolve around what was making me sick so that I could be well longer. So my boundaries, for me, my sickness was coming from any type of energy expenditure, which sounds nuts, but it was any type of physical, like I can take physical stress a little bit longer than I can take emotional stress. So for me, the top of the list is emotional stress, and then there's physical stress, and then there's, maybe even certain foods that can make me feel sick. And so my boundaries were around keeping me healthy. Those to me became the most important types of boundaries.
Yeah, that's so helpful. And I think, yeah, like some things you're just going to know, right?
Yes.
Like big grocery shopping trip for me, I'm like, I'm going to be out. But sometimes for me, boundaries is like, okay, I want to get out of the house, so I am going to go grocery shopping. But then after, I know that I'm going to need to rest. So how can we add that in? So I think I don't know, it's balancing lots of different things for our emotional and our physical health. Trying to balance all those is very difficult. So are there any boundaries you suggest that anyone who lives chronically ill should set up, or is it just individual for everything? What do you think?
I think it's individual. I know for a lot of us, a lot of us will say emotional stress takes us out probably faster than anything else. So, what I would recommend is just looking at your life. I know there's sometimes when we're well or we don't have a diagnosis yet, we deal with a lot of different stresses and maybe we're not making the best decisions. I know before I was fully diagnosed, I would push my body on purpose because I thought I was lazy, or I thought I could, if I pushed my body harder, that it would adjust and get in, regulate. And then I could go shopping and cook dinner like a normal person. And so before my diagnosis, I was really bad to myself. I was calling myself lazy. I was forcing myself through activities, even though I would become sick because I didn't have a diagnosis. So I thought, I just must be weak. I just must need to push myself harder. So at the time I was diagnosed, I really had to take a look at that and realize that I wasn't being kind to myself. I wasn't setting boundaries for my health in any way, shape, or form, because I thought if the doctors didn't diagnose anything, then I was just a lazy person that couldn't keep up. And I was forcing myself daily through cooking and cleaning and whatever it was. And I was forcing myself until I was sick most days, just because I thought it was the best route at the time. So when I was finally diagnosed, I realized I wasn't really being good to myself. I wasn't being kind. I wasn't setting boundaries. In fact, I was doing the opposite. I was trampling over my boundaries every day in hopes that it would boost me up and make me, be able to work harder or do those things. So I think it's important that all of us look at boundaries to protect our health, but also realize it's very hard to put in place. And at first, you will feel ridiculous doing it. I know there's a lot of shame when we have to say something like, I can't attend your birthday party because I'm just sick today. And we feel really guilty about having to say that. But I think we need to let a lot of that guilt go and just realize we're doing what's best for us, even if others can't understand it. And just know that we're keeping, ourselves, we're just protecting ourselves. And others don't have to understand it or get on board. They might think it's ridiculous. I don't know. But I had to stop caring about all of that and make sure I was number one, which was very foreign to me as a woman, as a mother. I had never put myself first or I thought it was like the thing you don't do was put yourself first. You put everyone before you. But I realized for me to be healthy, and when I first started, I was sick 4 days out of every week. By putting boundaries and trying different things, I'm sick about once every 2 months now. So the boundaries are really, really important for our health.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, that's a huge difference, right? And I think for me, the thing that really made a difference is when I stopped telling myself I had to do things. Like I have to, like even just things like that seem like I have to do it. Like I have to feed my kids. It's like, no, actually, I could just order DoorDash every day if I wanted to. Like, I could, like, call my neighbor or my mom. Like, there's always another option. And feeling guilty because, if I spend more money on quick and easy meals or something than, like, making a nice homemade whatever, like, I would feel guilty about that. even though I would be a better mom in other ways because I was having more energy for my kids. And I think,
Yes.
we need to decide where are those boundaries. And I think there's different times in our lives where our boundaries might change. Like there might be times where maybe I am able to cook a little bit more. I want to spend more time cooking.
Absolutely.
Because it helps my health and maybe it helps my relationships with my kids or something. But then I have to give something else. So maybe we give our energy in a different way. That's
Absolutely.
so helpful. What were you going to say?
How ridiculous this can be. When I first started making changes, see, I loved to cook. It was like my thing. I loved cooking. It was so ridiculous that I felt guilty to buy grated cheese instead of grating it myself. That was one of the first changes I made, was buy grated cheese. Why am I sitting there and grating it? And I felt terrible about it when I first switched over. We're just caught up in our heads, and there's no reason I have to grate the cheese. There's no reason that should even have made me think about it. But I started, okay, well, buy the lettuce shredded, buy the salad kits. There's ways that I can save my energy. And like you said, have more energy later, maybe be able to actually play a game with the kids or just do different things. And at first it was just on such a ridiculous level that even buying grated cheese bothered me because I felt like I wasn't doing something I was supposed to do. And we've put that on ourselves. And if you can let it go, I think, like buying grated cheese or buying even DoorDash if you have to, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. You're just doing it for your health.
Yeah, that's so good. I always like to think we're paying for it one way or another. Like we might pay with our money. Like it's more expensive to maybe buy a frozen meal than to make it homemade. But it takes less energy because if we're not using our money, then we're using our time or our energy. Like we're always having to pay with something, right? And I think when it comes to our health, there's some things that we just have to let go and pay for it in a different way. Maybe in a different way. With our relationship, maybe it's like I need my husband's help a little more in this area, but I help him in a different area, right? Like it's just we have to balance it all. Just have to decide what's worth. What are we spending on? Is it our energy? Is it our health? Is it our money? Is it our time? We have to pay for it in some way.
We do.
So how do you explain your boundaries to other people? Because that is so hard when other people don't get it. Or for me, sometimes it's like they get it at the beginning. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm on this diet. And then 2 months later, they're like, you're still doing that? Like, aren't you better? Or like they don't get that it's a lifelong thing. How do you explain your boundaries?
So the people that I explain my boundaries to is my immediate family and like my parents. And outside of that, I don't explain much more to anybody else other than who I feel is the most important, in my life at that time. So the other friends, family members don't really have to understand, or they don't even know that I have boundaries, so I'll pick and choose what I'm eating or not eating. And I don't really go into detail with a lot of people about it because I've tried a million diets. I've changed a million things about what I'm eating. And, if I decide I can't eat there, I just won't eat there. And I don't really talk to anybody about it or explain it. And they really don't notice that much. They don't notice if you're going to eat or not eat. And I don't even think they need to know why, because then we go through this whole thing about, what do you have? Why are you sick? And, how does not eating that help? Because it's very confusing, especially if they're well. I always look at it and say, if they're a well person or they haven't dealt with some type of chronic illness, they really never get it. They never get any of this that we're dealing with. I mean, they don't understand that from the time we wake up to the time we sleep, our days have, I know what I'm going to spend. I have to look at it and say, what's the most important thing to do today? Make sure you have energy for that one thing. And then I kind of make sure, they don't do that. They just kind of fly by the seat of their pants. And if someone calls at 9 o'clock at night and says, let's go watch a movie, they're like, yeah. Whereas we're like, we would have had to have planned for it for days to be able to do something like that. So I don't explain to that many people because there's no way they're ever going to get it. I just kind of do me and do what I need to do and realize they don't really need much of an explanation.
Yeah, I think that's great advice because I think we get in our heads about that too much. Like, probably they don't really care. First of all, like most people, like I said, like immediate family, like it affects my husband because if I'm eating a certain way, then is he going to eat a different meal? There are times where he'll make his own separate meal because he doesn't want to be on my diet. It's like a boundary thing, right? But for other people, it's like it doesn't matter. And I have just brought my own food to family parties before because it's just easier for me than to try to say, oh, I'm not eating this, this, and this. I'll just say, what are you eating? Let me know beforehand so that I can be prepared when I get there. Yeah.
I do that a lot of times too. So I'll prepare, I'll eat before I go, or I won't eat while I'm there, and I just don't, and they don't even really care or ask or even notice. They really don't. They're just kind of like, oh, okay, she might not be hungry today or whatever it is. So I just try, I think the less amount of people that we explain it to is probably the better and the least pushback that we get. So I just kind of do me. And if they happen to ask, hey, are you trying something new? Then I'll say, yeah, this is what I'm doing. And they'll be like, oh, okay, cool. So, but they don't really need to know, why I can't eat wheat or whatever it is at that moment.
Yeah, definitely. And I think sometimes it can come across as like, well, I'm not eating this, and then nobody should eat it. And it's like, I don't feel that way at all, but sometimes it comes across that way because I'm like, oh, I'm not eating sugar or whatever. And I also don't want people to feel judged or like, like, oh, I'm trying to get healthier when they don't understand that it's not just like, oh, I'm not trying to lose weight. I'm not trying to just like, even just feel a little bit better. Like I can't get out of bed most days and I don't really want to explain it to you. So yeah, that's so good. So do you have any other advice first for just navigating relationships with chronic illness?
I think it's hard. I think it's difficult, but I think if you can open up communication, I think you'll do best, and realize that it's not only hard on the person that's sick, but it's also hard on the person that lives with someone that is sick. I know there are days my husband is really frustrated, or there are days he feels like he's doing everything and I'm doing nothing. And I know there's a lot of feelings there, or, I have to shut down emotional arguments. That can be very frustrating. I can't talk about that right now. That's frustrating for him to have to put it off and not be able to talk. So I think we have to realize that it's hard on both sides, because sometimes I think I can get in my head and think it's really hard for me, but then I have to look at the other side of it. It's even hard on the children. There are things I can't do with them, maybe that they want to do. So it's everyone's giving and taking, and we just have to kind of figure it out and meet each other in the middle and realize that even with doing that, we're still going to have really hard days. There's still days that I feel bad about it, or my husband will feel bad about it. And it's still okay as long as we can keep communication open.
Yes. Oh, that's so good, because my husband and I just the other night were having a conversation about this. He was feeling burnt out. And so then I want to go into like fix it mode and be like, okay, well, how about like when you get off work, you're just off the clock, like take a break or like go on a weekend trip. Like I'm like going to the extremes. And he's like, Aimee, no, then I'm going to come back and you're going to be in a terrible place. Like we're not doing that. And like he knows, because he's been with me for so long, like he knows what like my limit is. And so I think that communication is so huge, because both of us knowing our limits, and sometimes there are times where we're like I am taking on just enough till I start to tip, and then he needs to come and just enough till he starts to tip, and we just keep going back and forth. And other times we're in a little bit better of a balance. Yeah. But I do think like remembering that it's not just hard for us, because yeah, we feel the physical pain, but those around us are struggling too, especially if it's a spouse or a parent or someone who's right there with you all the time. It can be just as difficult for them, just in different ways. right? And we need to be compassionate to them as well. So letting them set boundaries. Yeah, so good.
It has to be.
So how do you find joy and purpose when you're just living with pain and fatigue and all these symptoms all the time? How do you still find purpose in your life?
For me, I have the desire to help others. So I was in a really tough spot with, medicine's not working and feeling alone. And I just decided there has to be other people like me. And I wanted to communicate with them or find them and let them know there are things that we can still do. And you're not alone. There are people just like me. And it was probably my husband that helped me figure that out the easiest, because he was like, you need to find people like you so that when you say something, they understand what you're talking about and you can go, back and forth and get some ideas. And so it's just kind of like, I just wanted to help someone that was like me so that you don't feel alone anymore, or that you can realize that, you don't have to do it by yourself. There are others just like me out there trying to figure it out. And for me, that was my driving factor, was to open up and try to help as many people as I can. Because in the beginning, I did feel really alone. I felt like there was nobody like me or anybody that I could talk to. The doctors, would be perplexed when a medicine didn't help, or if I had weird side effects. They would act like I was the only one that ever had these side effects, and they didn't know what to do with me. And so I felt, alone in that. And I wanted to bring others along with me to say, you're not alone. I'm here. This is me. And a lot of times I would hear stories like, I tried one medicine, or I cut one thing out of my diet and I'm healed and I'm living my best life ever. And I couldn't figure out why that wasn't me. Like, why did I have to try 100 things? Why did I have to try 200 things? And so for me, the driving factor has been helping someone that's just like me out there.
Oh, that's so amazing, because it does feel so alone. And the problem is we hear those success stories, right? I was just at Costco the other day, and one of those times where I need to get out, and I was like, I'm going to crash after this. That just happened like 2 days ago. But I was at Costco, and this lady had this like lotion stuff, and she was like, do you want to try it? I'm like, my skin's pretty sensitive. Then she went into this whole spiel about how it might help, and how it's all natural and all this stuff. And okay, now I just lost my train of thought. What were we just talking about? I'm sorry, brain fog.
That's okay. So you got out of the house, lotions, and then...
What were you saying right before I was telling the story? I'm so sorry.
Right. This is hilarious.
It's real life.
I know. This is chronic illness.
Yeah.
101.
Well, I don't remember why I was telling the story. That's the problem.
Okay.
Oh, I know where I was going with that. Okay. I'm back. Okay. So she had all these pictures. It was like, this person had tried all this stuff for this skin condition, and she said, I have this like red thing on my arm. I don't know. I've had it my whole life. It's never bothered me. But she's like, oh, we can clear that up, whatever. And she shows me these before and after pictures of like these people tried everything, and then they just tried this cream, and it just took it away.
Magic.
And and I hear those stories, and I'm like, oh, I want that to happen for me. And so then, like, back a few years ago, I would just buy everything someone would say, because it's like, oh, that's how it works. And my mindset was, one day I'll find that thing that just snap my fingers, I'm cured. Like, I put on that lotion and it's done. Like, I never have to deal with that again. And most of us, I think, don't do it that way. You just hear those stories because they're the miraculous ones. They're the ones that go viral, or the ones that have the before and after pictures in the lotion station, right? And we think that like that's how it should be, when in reality, it might be that we need to cut out one thing from our diet, and we need to do this one supplement, and we need to cut out this one activity, and we need to reduce stress. And like, it's just little pieces of a puzzle instead of just one thing that's going to change our lives.
Yeah, that's very true. And like you said, it's most of us with the multiple layers having to do multiple different things. And it's not the one little story, the one little stories that we hear. And that's a huge mind shift that I also had to have, was not looking for the one magical solution, but just looking for part of the puzzle. Because in the beginning, I did the same thing. I, would try anything and everything and then I would lose hope and feel really bad when it didn't work for me. But it's not about finding one thing. It's about finding multiple things in all of the different areas. And, like part of it, setting boundaries. Part of it is supplements. Part of it is how long did you sleep last night? I mean, there's just so many different things to take into consideration. And it's the majority is like that. We just don't hear that much about it.
Right. So another question for you is, how do you know if something's working? Like, if you have so many things, right? Like, say you're like, okay, I'm going to go off gluten or I'm going to add this supplement. How do you know if that one thing is helping, if it's a part of your puzzle, or if it just, like, should you try multiple things at once? Should you try just one tiny thing at once? And how do you keep track of like all the symptoms?
Yeah, it's crazy. But for my job, I'm really analytical. And so I think I transferred the analytical ability into my chronic illness. And so I test things like you would in business. So like I'm testing certain things and I allow a certain length of time. And for me, I'm looking for some type of benefit that I can see or a lab result that I can see. So I'm looking for something. A lot of times we try supplements and I can't tell you what it did for me. And then other times I try a supplement and it was like a total game changer for energy levels or just something. I noticed a shift. And then a lot of times when I noticed some type of a shift, I will get off of it and then get back on it and say, do I see that same shift?
Oh, that's so good.
Which is it can be a little crazy because I did get off of a supplement because I thought the supplement was really helping with something. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to stop cold turkey because the results were just too good for me to even believe. I was like, is this really happening? And so I got off and I'm like, and got back on. I'm like, oh yeah, it's really working. So I kind of put that on the side of the supplement I can't live without, or the supplement that cannot run out. And then sometimes that will happen. I'll let a supplement run out and go, well, I wasn't getting any benefit from that. And then it runs out and 2 days later I fall flat on my face. And I'm like, well, maybe it was giving me a benefit that I wasn't aware of. So it's kind of hard, but I try to separate it out as much as I can. And then I look for some type of benefit, either in blood tests, because we're running blood work all the time anyway. And then, or I'm looking for some benefit that I can physically see, or I don't get off of it and then realize, well, there was a benefit. I just wasn't paying attention, and I'll jump back on to figure it out again. So it can be complicated. It's really not easy in any way, shape, or form. But it does keep me busy trying different things and figuring out what works. And if something really works, or I feel like it really changed, for me, it was about energy because I had no energy all of the time. And so if something gave me energy, I would pay attention and say, okay, this is working. But something you said earlier is it's working now, and it may not work that way all of the time. So a lot of times my supplements shift from what I'm taking and then trying different things.
Gotcha. Yeah. I think sometimes when things help, I've noticed in myself that I don't notice it. Like, I was having a lot of like mood swings and stuff after the baby, and I started taking the supplement and they went away, but I didn't like realize it right away. And then I didn't take it a couple days and I was like, why am I just like lashing out and like having all this? And then I realized like, oh my gosh, I didn't take that supplement.
Yeah.
And then, but I wouldn't, it was like I didn't notice because when something's bad or you're in pain or you're fatigued, you notice it more than if you're like, you're not like, you think of like people who aren't ill, you're like, how do they complain about stuff? Like, what if they felt like us? It's because they are not like noticing it, right? They're not noticing these things. And so they notice other things in their lives. And so, yeah, yes. I think that's really good. Okay. So you talked about, sorry, we went off on a little bit when you talked about joy and purpose. So how do you find those people that you can share your story with? What do you do for that?
So for me, I use YouTube for that. So I created a YouTube channel and just started creating videos of whatever I felt I needed to talk about. And for me, I talk a lot about supplements or studies or trying new things. And then I like to talk about what worked. Sometimes I talk about what doesn't work, but how that it worked, or I try to figure out the mechanisms behind it, because I feel like if I can tell my story and someone relates, or they say, oh, well, I have that going on, maybe it will work for me too. And I get a lot of feedbacks in the comments saying, I tried this, it worked for me. Thank you for telling me, because no one else knew about this. And so for me, I just use social media. I'm on social media a lot anyway because of my work. And so I just figured, well, why not tell your chronic illness stories, and the algo will find other people that are like me, that are interested in the same things. I'm looking up supplements on YouTube and talking about them, and people that are like me are looking up, a lot of the same supplements and same types of diets that we all try. And there's a lot of similarities. So I just try to find people on YouTube to share my story. I want to be open about it, just so they don't feel alone. And then when I try something and it works, I'm like, if you have this, maybe this will work for you too. Maybe it won't. And it just depends on where we're at in our story, because we talked about times where I don't want to try anything new. I don't want to do anything, and I don't want to alter my schedule. But a lot of times I do things step by step, or just one thing at a time. I go very slow. If I change something in my diet, it's like, like I have a certain shake that I drink every morning. My first go-to is to add something new to that shake. So it takes very little effort on my part to just make that one little shift or one little change. And then I just like talking about it to say, and people are actually interested. They're like, well, why would you put that in your shake? And I'm like, well, the studies said this or did this. And now I'm curious. And then other people become curious too. So it's just kind of slowly adapting and changing, and then talking about it out loud in case somebody else out there, needs a little bit of help or thought process behind it.
Yeah, that's so amazing. And I think, especially with things like YouTube and social media, it sometimes feels like you're just like a small fish in this huge ocean, and somebody's already talked about this or whatever. But I like to look at it as like we all have something unique to bring. Like you have this unique side of like having the data that's something that I don't have. So like my audience, it's like, no, I need some more data. Like Aimee doesn't know what she's talking about. And so they'll come to you, right? And then like they'll go to someone else for something, a different part of their journey. Just like we have little things that help us with our health journey. I think we all need like little pieces of different people and different people's stories. So I think it's so powerful to share your story, even if it feels like everyone's already shared, or does anybody care? Yes, somebody does, because somebody is looking for exactly what you are bringing. And it's important to remember that there's someone looking for you. I'm most likely tons and tons of people, but they will find you if you put it out there, right? So how can people get more help from you? Or I can link your YouTube, and I don't know if you have like a website or anything, but I'll link your social media stuff in the podcast notes. Is there any other way that people can get more advice from you, or if they have questions for you, where should they go?
A lot of times people find me either on YouTube or Facebook. I'm on Facebook a lot too for work and for socially. And believe it or not, so I talk a lot about marketing and this, because that was my first thing. But believe it or not, even in the marketing world, a lot of us are sick and in need of help. So now I'm kind of known as like into marketing, but also the person to go to if you want to, like, why are you drinking this, Marie? Or why are you doing this? So it's either YouTube or Facebook that I'm at most of the time. And then YouTube predominantly to talk about chronic illness and that type of thing. But I'm there, and people reach me in the comments. There's an email, I think, address I put even in the YouTube. People have reached me that way just to kind of communicate and talk about whatever it is that they were looking for or needing. So that's predominantly how everyone's getting in touch with me.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, that will all be linked. And I'm definitely going to have some questions for you. Do you have any other advice for anyone living chronically ill you want to leave us with?
I just think it's important that we realize there's going to be a lot of ups and downs. And when we're in the down, to realize that it's going to go back up. We just need to give ourselves a little bit of time. I think it's really easy to get really wrapped up into the down moments and think that that's going to be that way forever, but it's not. I promise you, whatever comes down also comes back up. So just give yourself time in that moment to realize it's going to be okay. And, find your people online or whatever you need to do to have a support system so that when things are really, really bad, you have a place you can go and you can talk about these things. And my biggest advice is just to realize that, even though you're really down in the moment, the next day or even the next day after that, something miraculously can happen or change that you don't even know is coming. And so just don't give up hope. Don't give up hope.
Beautifully well said. That was wonderful. I needed to hear that today. So thank you so much for being here. We'll end with that because I don't have anything better to say than how you ended that.